So, Tim Pool hosted Counterpoints, or Conor, who I have covered on this channel for being a fake right-winger who gets dark money from leftist organizations and openly aligns with leftists because Trump bad.
A part of the solution, which is that
you represent so many leftist organizations these days. Is that another one?
Well, they're liberals, but anyways.
I know you got paid by Progressive Victory and a bunch of other people. Don't keep hawking your shit, or I'm going to attack you for the fact that you take money from leftists. Like, calm down, brother.
Listen, man, I've never made it a hidden thing that I am a never Trumper.
Conor will be debating a libertarian named Fabian Liberty, or Scott, about welfare destroying the family. Fabian Liberty is an inversion of the Fabian socialists who advocated for a long march through the institutions to implement Marxism in a top-down structure. In true communist fashion, their coat of arms is a wolf in sheep's clothing. So Fabian Liberty means weaning off of government intervention and dependence to allow individuals maximum freedom to create their own culture of local mutual interdependence. Scott has a strong, linear, historical perspective accompanied by mountains of data, philosophy, and psychology to support his prescriptions for society. Conor has nothing but dark money and paltry internet blood sport debate tactics and sophomoric rhetoric. Let me give you a little taste of what I'm talking about.
So you're a proponent of the welfare system?
Yeah, I think that social spending, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's, the physical security, social tiers. I think that it's the government's job in order to support those tiers so we have a healthy society. I identify as center-right. I'm like conservative in a healthy chunk of ways. So I think that in order to have a healthy conservative society, you need to make sure that people can become fully formed human beings.
That sounds like a leftist position.
Well, leftism, no offense, but like leftist traveling in these circles, that's either socialist or communist. I'm neither. You're taking facts and then you're like assuming motivation.
No, so I can quote.
Hey, buddy, listen. You talked for like 4 minutes. I want the opportunity to talk as well. Okay.
You mentioned it's welfare and Social Security wasn't the most effective way to do it. Mm-hmm. Do you believe that it was a temporary band-aid, a mistake to do? Should the elderly have just figured it out on their own?
No. So what I would say is that fraternal order society.
Can I be a jerk real quick?
Sure, be a jerk.
Okay. I think you would say that.
I'm fighting to make this place, America, better. And the best way that you can do that is to fight to get the government that is stealing so much money and funneling it to, I don't know, condoms in Africa somewhere instead of actually.
Why is condoms in Africa a bad thing?
Because it's not here.
Well,
because we have people.
Wait. The American people largely don't know about these black budget operations, and sometimes they're not overtly black budget. Why doesn't the U.S. explicitly tell its American people, we are going to take your tax dollars for use in overthrowing the government of Cuba?
I think we vaguely do. I think this information is all available. And on top of that, like people criticize like neoconservatives for... I don't know why you're laughing.
I'm laughing because a whistleblower had to prove it, and you're like, but we do say it. It's like, no, obviously
what do you think that,
not true because
yes,
they didn't tell us that.
Do you think the American people are aware of just how much money goes into toppling foreign governments?
Well, they should probably Google it because it's all available.
I mean, it's not.
It's not?
It's all Googleable,
what's not
bro.
Available? What's not? Please tell me what like secret operation or overt operation we are unaware of at this time.
I'm sorry. Are you asking me to tell you the thing that the government has hidden from me?
So as an example,
are you fucking retarded right now?
No, Scott. Not just now, but in a constant state of perpetuity. So this debate is about whether or not welfare has destroyed the United States culture and family. Scott's position is essentially the government is stealing our money and not reinvesting it back to us. He brings up how effective fraternal organizations were when people were allowed to pool their own money locally and provide for each other in terms of social safety nets, healthcare, and voluntary cultural cohesion and reliance on one another.
I think before we can even have this conversation, we have to understand what has happened historically.
Okay.
Right? And there is this lie that is like, well, if the government won't do it, who will do it? Mm-hmm. And the thing is that in the 1800s and the early 1900s, we did it without the government. And we did it so fucking well that the government had to come in and regulate and destroy what we were doing because healthcare costs were too low. That is what our government did. They destroyed fraternal societies. In the 1920s, 1 in 3 men in America were a member of a fraternal society. By 1912, 1 in 25 men in America were a member of the Loyal Order of the Moose. You might hear like Moose Lodge, right? And for a half week's salary in 1912, you would get an annual membership and be a member of the Moose Lodge. What did you get for that? You got sick pay, you got unemployment. If you died, your kids went to an orphanage in Maryland where the people that graduated, males made 70.9% more than the average American male. Females made 62.5% more. You had everything that you had elderly care. There was tons of these organizations, and but there was one problem historically, which is that healthcare costs were too low and doctors weren't making enough money. So they used the state to crush these institutions.
This is a little conspiratorial for me.
It's not conspiratorial, it's fact.
Okay.
Conor has no idea what Scott is talking about, so instead of saying, I don't know a lot about that, I'd have to do more research on it, and then possibly pivoting to what he wants to discuss in rebuttal to what Scott said, he just goes, that sounds conspiratorial, you don't know what they were thinking in their brains. Or Conor just could have asked, what's your evidence for what you're saying? But he doesn't want him to talk. He wants him to shut up. He wants him to stop talking because Conor has no idea what he's talking about, and Conor needs to go into full-on rhetoric mode.
You're saying that because it was so cheap that the federal government had to destroy the fraternal societies in order to replace them. Okay, yeah, you're taking facts and then you're like assuming motivation.
No, so I can quote.
Hey, buddy, listen. You talked for like 4 minutes. I want the opportunity to talk as well. Okay.
It's such a leftist rhetorical tactic. Instead of just interjecting with your counter evidence or his counterpoint, he has to do a memory wipe in the conversation. Hey, can I speak? Can I speak? Can I finish? Can I finish? Do I get a word? Do I get a turn? You've been talking. And then you start talking how you're talking this whole time, instead of just talking about what you want to talk about. Instead of being a man and battling for airspace and then saying your idea, he has to go, whoa, buddy. I need to completely stop you from talking and then be like, hey man, I'm just trying to talk right now. Only leftists do that. It's such an annoying tactic. It's meant to halt the conversation and not even pivot, but completely redirect it into whatever screed you want to go into.
The point is that there are also a whole bunch of narratives from the 19th century and the early 20th century, and those narratives were that.
I love it. Scott lays out data, a timeline, and Conor's like, hold on, let me stop this conversation. I'm gonna respond, let me respond. Anyway, so there's a bunch of narratives. He has such a postmodern approach to this conversation, to this data-driven conversation. So Conor's point right now is gonna be, as he just said, narratives. It's gonna be a narrative that he's saying, that he's heard, and that sounds good to him, but does he have a lot of backing with this narrative, or is it just a narrative? It's like he doesn't believe in objective truth.
The working class had to work in industrial tenement housing, that they worked in effectively like corporate housing, that the corporations were fleecing their own workers so they couldn't get by. They had subsistence living. The only way that they were able to survive was through these social networks, and it was a miserable existence. The whole reason why we started these, there was public outcry for this legislation in the first place was because there weren't the things that you were talking about. There weren't
What
workers'
legislation
protections.
are you talking about? What was their public outcry for legislation as pertains to fraternal
I don't
order
have
societies?
I don't have the name of the specific legislation passed 100 and some odd years ago.
Whoa, hold on there, Scott. Calm down. Conor's just saying the word legislation, rhetorically, because he's telling a narrative. He's telling a story to suit his point. He's not backing anything up with data or any sort of research. That's exactly why you'd ask him, like, what legislation are you talking about? Listen, dude, I don't fucking know what I'm talking about. I'm trying to tell a story over here.
But I know for a fact that people were living in tenement housing with extended families. I know for a fact that the living conditions sucked. I know that the pay sucked. And I know that there was an outcry that basically what happened when you were a worker in the late 19th century or early 20th century, that basically if you lost your fingers to an industrial machine, the corporation told you to pound sand. And it's tough luck.
Okay,
That's why these programs were created, was because the corporations were telling young working families to go fudge themselves when they got screwed.
So none of that is an argument against what I stated. What you have said is that in history, at the turn of...
You said it was a federal conspiracy in order to destroy the fraternal societies.
Yes, and what you said has nothing to do with what I said, right?
Well, what I would say is this is how they destroyed the fraternal societies, because it was insufficient.
Conor has not shown, will not show, and will never research as to whether or not that's true. He doesn't know why the fraternal organizations were shut down. He knows that he has to say it's because they were inefficient, but it's almost like Conor interrupted Scott before Scott could give his evidence.
Well, you already admitted that you don't understand the history of fraternal society.
No, I don't.
Right? Which is fine because, like
You just made up a position, but go ahead.
Did I make up that position? Or are you saying that you
did you hear me say into this microphone in the past 5 minutes? I don't understand the history of fraternal societies. Did I say that?
Well, you said that you're not aware of what the legislation was in terms of like and what those laws were or that process.
Okay, was there
that got
a
rid
law,
of them?
Was
you're
there
saying
a law
it's
in the early 20th century?
Hold on. You're saying that it's a conspiracy theory, right? And then you're saying these laws were passed by public outcry.
I'm assigning motivation that you haven't evidenced. That's what I'm saying.
So let me get into it.
So, step 1, levy a baseless accusation. Then when your interlocutor goes to defend himself, silence him.
You're taking facts and then you're like assuming motivation.
No, so I can quote.
Hey!
Step 2, obfuscate to hide your lack of knowledge.
Okay,
That's why these programs were created, was because the corporations were telling young working families to go fudge themselves when they got screwed.
So none of that is an argument against what I stated.
Step 3, justify your feigned indignance by exclaiming you haven't been shown evidence, even though you silenced him so he couldn't provide the evidence.
You're saying that it's a conspiracy theory, right? And then you're saying these laws were passed by public
you're
outcry.
assigning motivation that you haven't evidenced. That's what I'm saying.
So let me get into it.
And Conor lands the dismount with performative disbelief as he shoves his fist into his cheek. The judges score that a perfect 10 out of 10 for circular leftist debate tactics. So let's see how Conor's going to interpret the research that Scott has done. Spoiler, he's going to call it magic.
So I reject the fact that 100 years ago, the fraternity and community bonds of America were, magical and better and like all this kind of crap. I fundamentally
didn't make that argument. I made a factual argument that 1 and 3. I made a factual.
Okay, I don't care. I'm gonna.
Conor's like, oh, you think the fraternal organizations are so magical? And Scott's like, no, I don't think they're magical. I'm just telling you what happened historically. And then Conor just cuts in with, I don't care. It's getting in the way of my story. So Conor's big brain rebuttal is going to be, now that the government has been interfering for over a century, why don't you just go back and do what you think we should have done with your fraternal organizations now? Now that the government's taking so much of your money, why don't you just go and try and do it now? And he's gonna cross a huge line in the sand with a libertarian when he says that.
For instance, there's this like a anarchist concept of basically creating parallel structures to the state in order to evaporate the state's power. If you want to talk all this smack about how the welfare state is destroying society or whatever, then what you would do if you were a rich person, not that you have a whole lot of money in your checking account, but you would take that money and you would put it into creating parallel structures in order to evaporate this power. But what I hear and see consistently from very rich people who complain about these problems is they don't put their money where their mouth is. They don't give a shit about community. They don't care about creating parallel structures in order to dissolve the power of the state.
There's a couple of things here. Number one, 15.2% of all the money that you should be making is immediately stolen from you out of every paycheck. So that you can just...
Conor, please, just let the libertarians say the taxes are stolen. Please, just let them say the word stolen.
I reject the word stolen, but continue.
Well, I didn't fucking choose to have them take my money.
Can I briefly address African condoms?
Sure.
Okay, so the whole point is that when we have access to, if we're the new Rome, if we're the global empire, if we have access to all these exterior markets, then the easiest way to get into these markets is by exuding soft power. In West and East Africa and South Africa, there are problems like HIV, lack of parental figures in the home, et cetera, et cetera. And so condoms, you can get to them for cents on the dollar.
Look at Scott's reaction to sending Africa condoms. But Conor makes a good point. As we all know, Africa is not rich with natural resources. They don't know what rubber or latex is. It's like showing them the wheel when you show them a condom. They just can't make the condoms themselves. So the United States has to send them condoms. And then we all know that they use condoms, right? I love the idea that you just have to give people condoms and it's like, we know there's condoms. They're widely available. It feels better without condoms. That's really what it comes down to. It's more of a cultural thing, but now we're in the weeds. All Scott wants to do is talk about welfare, which is what the topic is supposed to be, and Conor wants to talk about anything but that. All Scott did was say, I don't want my money going to sending condoms to Africa. And so Conor's like, can we just talk about sending condoms to Africa and how good of a thing that is because it's helping them so much?
And you are helping them build up their societies. So what happens is when South Africa, East Africa, West Africa have minerals, they have gold, they have oil, they have whatever, they're like, oh, the Americans gave us access to contraception so we could build a better society. We'll sell it to them at a reasonable rate.
That is the most
beautiful, cents on the dollar.
That is the most beautiful. That is the most beautiful.
I would love to
literal
hear your rebuttal.
interpretation of how the State Department does foreign policy.
Okay, wait.
It really is an adolescent's view of the world. Oh, since we give them condoms, they give us discounts on their goods. Is it like that? It might be like that. I don't think it's like that. I don't even know what kind of opinion that is. Here's Scott with his data, historical analysis, and Connor's like, yeah, you give them condoms, you get a gold ring. That's how it works, right? I can't imagine how frustrating this conversation must be for Scott. But let's move along to something that Connor really wants to talk about, which is how the welfare state has affected the modern woman.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
have no problem finishing this train of thought, but I also thought we were going to talk about how like welfare created like the modern woman or the modern society or whatever, which I'm sure we'll get to.
Connor throwing some shade, being like, hey, I want to get back to the topic at hand about how this affects the modern woman, but go ahead. I'm sure we'll get around to it.
I actually came prepared with historical, psychological,
Well, dude, I didn't sign up for a 2-hour conversation about the early 20th century. I wanted to talk about whether or not the welfare
I want to talk about
created a
welfare
modern
state.
woman.
Yeah, and so we have to talk about what came
No, we
before
don't.
it.
We can
have
talk
to
about it now.
Connor becomes more and more eager to really talk about how the welfare state affects the modern woman. Okay, he probably has a silver bullet in the chamber, right?
So as an example, like you could point to these things. We're talking about hard power, soft power, and I don't care if we bring it back to welfare and the modern woman. That's fine. But
The topic, you mean?
We should.
okay,
The topic, yeah.
But real quick, if
Okay, so then he passively aggressively is like, oh, well, we could bring it on topic back to the modern woman. And then Scott and Tim are like, yeah, like the original topic. He's like, okay, blah. Before we do that, it's always hot and cold, push and pull with Connor. I don't know how much respect you have for Connor so far in this video, but do you want to lose a little more respect for him?
Let's start here. What is the modern woman in your view?
I don't want to answer that question because I think that
Finally gets a spotlight put on him and he goes, I don't want to answer that. Are you kidding me? Clucking all that time about let's bring it around to the modern woman. And then Tim asks him directly and he literally says, I don't want to answer that. Everything Connor says is a distraction, an obfuscation, and nothing more than hollow rhetoric. But Connor doesn't just make you lose respect for him all at once. You think you've hit the floor, now I can't possibly respect him any less. He's going to keep digging his way to hell with how little you can possibly respect this man over and over again, the longer he speaks.
Let's start here. What is the modern woman in your view?
I don't want to answer that question because I think that a lot of people have like really stereotypical notions of what the modern woman is. I think there's plenty of mildly traditional women, so I would prefer it if he answered the question about what the modern woman is.
Well, would you look at that? I just lost a little more respect for Connor. Barks all this time about how he wants to talk about this topic. Then he's asked directly and he goes, you know what? Have him answer first. I don't know. I can't. I'm not answering that. Have him answer. So now he passes it off onto the guy he's trying to own in a debate. After squealing like a little piggy the entire time, wanting to talk about this.
What is the modern woman?
Yeah, I would actually ask for like, I mean, that's going to be difficult.
Okay, I'll
to
jump
find.
on the grenade.
Just lost a little more respect for Connor. Scott, being put completely on the spot of how to answer this really vague question, starts to think out loud. Within 2 seconds of him thinking out loud, Connor goes, okay, fine, I'll jump on the grenade. Hot and cold, up and down. Absolutely pungent period behavior.
I'll jump on the grenade.
No, I don't like. I'll do it, right? But the problem is like the modern woman.
I'll answer it for you guys.
If I want to do it, so if I want to do it within if I want to do it within the context of the conversation that we're having, right? What I would say is that the modern woman is someone that is affected deeply by anime, someone that is a person with so many choices that it is a crippling level of choices, that they lack cultural norms and they lack the guardrails that previous generations had so that they could actually achieve their goals and be happy and content.
That seems to describe the non-religious Democrat female in modern times. What is the culture around her? When he says anime, that essentially means where culture can shift quickly and then a person doesn't know what their societal roles are. They don't know what their role is in their culture. And so without religion or a tight-knit family and basing everything on politics, they don't really know what they're supposed to do. And so they inevitably gravitate toward a strong political force that's advocating on behalf of them, which then just becomes the government. Scott describes it philosophically, but it seems to manifest in reality that way.
So I won't get into stereotypes. I'll just tell you that the 70% of millennial females vote for the Democratic Party and support the party agenda, which is defined as strong welfare states, what we would describe as social justice or intersectional issues, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a smaller portion of the modern women believes in traditional family conservative values.
Yeah.
So it's usually to say that they are more goal and career oriented than in the past. Modern women of today, as opposed to 100 years ago.
Right, so the role of these women is just to be the opposite of normal and try to enter the workforce like men. What are the role they have culturally? They're just trying to do things the opposite of how they were if they're going to be on the left. So it's essentially what Scott said.
And more politically active and more left economic leaning and left cultural leaning.
Sure, and I think we can point to a variety of reasons for why that would be.
All right, Connor should be nice and warmed up now. Scott's given his answer concisely. Tim has given his answer concisely as to how welfare has affected the modern woman. Now Connor finally gets to go. Let's see if he rambles incoherently like a little twerp, or if he actually has anything of value to say.
And I think we can point to a variety of reasons for why that would be, particularly when we're in the day and age. And by the way, like, I'm not pro-abortion. I'm relatively speaking like anti-abortion. But when we're talking about like boiling down modern binary politics into subjects, I care about guns. Okay, I love the Second Amendment. I think, I believe in it wholeheartedly. So every time that the Democrats threaten the Second Amendment, I become more right wing. Well, within the past decade or two, we've had Republicans not only openly threaten birth control, Roe versus Wade, all that kind of stuff. We had them succeed. They effectively achieved one of the greatest social conservative victories in the past 50 years.
Okay, that was about 40 seconds of some hard, incongruent rambling. Something about he's a right winger, but he likes guns, and most importantly, Roe vs. Wade was one of the most socially conservative victories. How much of a Republican is this guy? Overturning Roe vs. Wade is a huge socially conservative victory. Social conservatism would probably be no abortion, right? If you're going to be really socially conservative about it.
So I'm not surprised that women are jumping left. They're doing it in reaction to the right.
I suppose you could argue it's not a victory. If you lose a battlefield and reclaim it, it's technically a victory. But you're still net zero.
I guess. I don't know where we really want to take it from here.
Don't know where to take it from here. You were begging to bring up the modern woman and welfare, and then you started talking about guns and being right wing, and now you're like, oh yeah, I guess it's not really socially conservative. I don't know where to go from here. What a poser. What a fake. He gets money from leftists to act like a right-winger, and he begs to talk about this, and then he has nothing to say for himself. It's just so pathetic. It's so annoying.
You really want to take it from here. I would probably
a conservative victory would be the abolishment of abortion.
A social conservative victory would be the abolition of abortion.
Abolition.
I agree. Yeah, 100%. But the point is that we live in a society. We're in a democratic republic. There's a whole bunch of different tribes that all vie over how to live, in the future. And I think that women are advocating in their own self-interest, which makes sense. If you want, this is something that I thought about. I disagree with it, but conceptually I understand it.
What better use of Connor's time than to say he disagrees with this, but now let him go into detail justifying it and defending it while saying he disagrees with it. Why not advocate for a position you do agree with now that you have this platform, now that you finally have time to talk about this thing you so desperately wanted to talk about?
Men, relatively speaking, have bodily autonomy. There's a reduced ability for us to get raped and murdered because we have a larger capacity for violence, in my opinion. With women, you're almost at constant threat through the society that you could be raped, you could be physically abused, you can do this, you can do that. And so you're constantly surrounded by potential threats. And one of the ways that you can assert control is that if somebody rapes you and impregnates you, then you can assert control over whether or not you carry out that can carry out that pregnancy. So that might feel like some level of control in a potentially hostile society. So that's probably why they want to grab onto it as a measure of control. While I still disagree with it.
Isn't Connor so right-wing, reducing the modern woman down to her bodily autonomy if she gets raped and to have an abortion? That's not leftist at all. Even though the vast majority, most abortions are elective, don't want the kid, think 1 or 2% of abortions are because of rape, and that's it. That's what he has to say about the modern woman, which makes sense because he admits that he's working for Democrats. He'll say temporarily working for Democrats, but I'll end the video debunking that.
Part of the reason why I'm not a Democrat, even though I'm temporarily working for Democrats because I hate Trump so much. But the point is, I'm not philosophically a Democrat.
Oh, he's just working for Democrats temporarily, and he's not philosophically a Democrat, but he comes on here and he sounds like a lefty the entire time he's talking, and he's a rhino. He's a Republican in name only. I'm pretty sure he calls himself a rhino.
I'm like a rhino neocon a little bit.
So he's talking out of his ass, he's a paid puppet, he'll say whatever he has to say to suit his donors. So let's end this video with a previous video I made about Conor. You can click on it up at the top if you want to watch that video. He's been getting paid by leftist organizations since October of 2023. So when he says getting paid by them temporarily, he's been getting paid by them for a year and a half. Have a good one.
So,
I can't speak to Conor's content. I don't know enough
I
about
understand.
it.
You're just talking about yourself, right?
Yeah, I can't speak to anyone
That's fine.
else's content. But you're making these. Can you
But it is
show me
possible.
where it has? I'm going to ask you the same question because I'll stick up for my boy Conor here. You're making an assertion that has changed his content. Prove it.
So are you paid by Progressive Victory?
Yes.
And you have been since October of last year?
Yes.
So Conor starts getting paid by PV in October of 2023. His channel's been around for like 2 years now. It's all of his content. Now let's see if we can try and mark exactly when his content changed and how his content changed. Oh look, here's episode 1 of Counterfire with Brianna Wu. Let's see what that date is. November 24th of 2023. Curious. So a month after he started getting paid by Progressive Victory, he gives half of his channel to Brianna Wu, a political and current event channel featuring Conor and Brianna Wu. These are the most pathetic attempts at plausible deniability I've ever seen. This is like a man walking up to a prostitute. He drops 40 bucks on the ground. The prostitute picks it up, gives him a BG McSqueegee and says, "He didn't pay me. He dropped the money and I just so happened to pick it up." Conor isn't being paid by Brianna. It just so happens PV offered him an overwhelming amount of money.
They made an offer and I was like, why the f would you pay me that much? For that amount of money, I would work 20 hours a week, 30 hours a week.
And after such an exorbitant and magnanimous amount of money was offered to him to get progressive candidates elected, you would have to be a conspiracy theorist to draw a correlation here. That's what's so fun about dark money. You can't prove anything. Then they gaslight you like you're crazy when you notice a huge shift in their behavior.
I want to say this very fucking clearly, not just for you, but for everyone else who has the same critique of me that you do. I give a fuck more about the United States staying proactive in Ukraine and in Israel than I do about Vosh jerking off to fucking cartoon pornography of children.